Thank you for your gracious invitation. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here. My fellow distinguished speakers, Senator Mushahed Hussain, Senator Itazaz Ahsan, and distinguished personalities in this gathering. I think we've been benefited since the very inception of this important conference. I think Mr. Moeed Yusuf set the tone with his extremely lucid elaboration of what strategic communication means to projecting the national narrative. And he was followed most ably by Senator Mushahed, who dwelt on the concept of soft power and how other countries have used that to develop their national narrative. And we have just heard an excellent exposition of history by Senator Itazaz Ahsan, a sweeping panoramic survey of history. Most of his contentions I, of course, very enthusiastically endorse. Some I take the liberty of respectfully disagreeing with him, but I do not wish to convert this into an argumentative session because what binds us is much more important than what may not divide us, but may place us on different vantage points looking at the same phenomenon. The formulation of the conference is very intriguing. It's different because it uses the word actualization, and that's a very formidable task, to actualize something. To actualize something which actually already exists. Like the concept of the ideology of Pakistan is used very loosely and freely. But there is no single document in 74 years of history that can be pointed to and said to be the ideology of Pakistan. There is no such document. There is no such agreed text. And yet, Nazriya-e-Pakistan, ideology of Pakistan, and then equating it with religion. Religion cannot be an ideology because an ideology is by nature dynamic, always vulnerable and open to change. Communism changed fundamentally when China changed economic communism and retained political communism. Capitalism has gone through so many phases of change. Religions, parts of it, do not change. Those are permanent pillars. Of course, through ijtihad, Islam is supposed to expand and develop the interpretation of principles according to new knowledge. So, when we talk of actualizing something, I am struck by the fact that we already have a narrative which is actualized by the way the people of Pakistan live out their lives, whether in penury and poverty and wretchedness and despair, or the middle class, the growing, very rapidly expanding middle class, upper middle, lower middle, upper middle class, also has its own lifestyle. They are living out the narrative of Pakistan and that small band of elite Pakistanis, rich Pakistanis. So, there are multiple narratives. And is there something wrong with that? I don't think so. Because there are some points at which all these multiple narratives converge. There is an irreducible minimal where there is more or less consensus that this is what makes us Pakistanis. This is what makes us cheer the Pakistani cricket team, to take the most obvious expression of a national narrative and national identity, which is the subject of my presentation. Elements of Pakistani national identity. It is both good and it is a bit sad that it has to take a cricket match to make us unanimously agree on what is it to be Pakistani. It is not so sad when you salute the flag or you sing the national anthem. I would imagine 99% of the people of Pakistan feel their hearts warming up when they hear the national anthem, when they see the flag flying high. There's unanimity. It's part of the narrative. It's part of the actualization of Pakistan. And the remarkable thing about Pakistani identity is that for an identity based on a word that is only 88 years old, 88, a baby age for a word. The age of a word gives true resonance and character. Misr, Egypt, pre-Islamic, post-Islamic, not post, currently Islamic. Misr remains Misr. Persia, China. Look at the resonance in each of those names. A Chinese can draw upon thousands of years of history connected to the word China. A Pakistani cannot. A Pakistani can look back with pride at Mehergarh, beyond Mohenjo-daro. Ironically, many educated people in our country don't even know where Mehergarh is. It is a little distance from Sibi in Balochistan, and I've been there. And look at the splendid artistry and artifacts that they've produced, lying neglected in the Quetta Museum, and the site devastated because of a tribal conflict local between the Rinds and the Raisanis. So Pakistanis can draw upon Mehergarh, but there's no Pakistan then. And this incredible capacity of a people to resonate with this name, even when the majority of Pakistanis rejected the name Pakistan in 1971. My God. Is there an instance in history where the majority population of a country rejects the name of Pakistan, the minority retrieves it, clings on to it, saves it, savors it, rebuilds it, takes pride in it? What a name, Pakistan. And it makes up for its tender young age. Because 1971 was not a rejection of the concept of Pakistan. It was a rejection of the state structure of Pakistan. A state structure which in any case was the world's most awkward, most crazy, imbalanced state structure. Imbalanced because we had 1,000 miles of hostile territory. And we didn't just have one hostile neighbor, we had two hostile neighbors. Israel also had two hostile neighbors or more, but the difference was that there was no next door Jewish state to Israel which also said you don't have a right to exist. Afghanistan was the only country that objected to Pakistan's application for admission to the UN. My God, imagine moving into sector, whatever, F11 in Islamabad, then your two immediate neighbors don't want you there. They have guns pointed at you. And yet we survived for 24 years. So Pakistan is a miracle. I'm sure the big boss had a hand in it, but I would not underestimate the role played by the people of Pakistan. What a people. Fantastic people. Despite the distorted versions of history that Eazaz Ahsan has very correctly pointed out, despite that, despite the fact that we were founded on the basis of a Muslim faith, look at the moderation and sense of balance. Look at the sagacity with which they vote. Ever since the first general election in 1970 to date 2018, never Have the people of Pakistan bestowed political power to political parties that use and exploit religion? Wah, wah, wah. What a character, this Pakistani nation. Despite the brainwashing of Ziaul Haq's years, it is ironical, it's a credit to the armed forces. Not a single chief of army staff who succeeded Ziaul Haq has been anywhere remotely near Ziaul Haq. Each of them has been a virtual opposite of Ziaul Haq. So he may have damaged society and he may also have damaged the armed forces, but he certainly has not been able to produce successor chiefs of army staff who've tried to build on his dubious legacy. And that's another tribute to the people of Pakistan. Because after all, the army, with all its other problems of undue intrusion into civil space, is a merit-based institution. And they have shortcomings, but it produces people who come from the grassroots, the armed forces. You don't have to be someone's son to become a general. You don't have to be someone's daughter or someone's bhatija. You rise on merit. So a country with a question of national identity. Are we a country with national identity issues? Are we a nation? Cynics and skeptics sometimes pose this question. 70 साल हो गए अभी तक हम एक नेशन नहीं बने. अरे बाबा क्या है, कैसे, क्या जल्दी है आपको नेशन बनने की? Nations take hundreds of years to evolve. And in any case, is there unanimity on the definition of what is a nation? What is a nation? Hugh Seaton Watson, who is acknowledged as a scholar on nationalism, says it is not possible to give a scientific definition of what is a nation. Benedict Anderson calls a nation an imagined community. Well, look at the state of nations today. We've got used to this word nation. We have 193 members of the United Nations. It should have actually been called United States. But the US has unfortunately had borrowed the word United States. But what is a nation? In North America today, there are hundreds of native, original denizens who call themselves First Nations. First Nations. There are at least 60 First Nations in Canada. There are about 500 tribes. And not to mention the United States, where the original population of the Native Americans was 60 million. Thanks to the genocide committed by the Europeans the last 400 years, their population is now down to barely 7 million out of 330 million. And in America today, whether it is the Cherokees or the Sioux or the Navajos, they call themselves First Nations. So in Pakistan, if there is confusion about being a nation, I see that as a sign of health, vigor, evolution. In my humble study of identity, I have inflicted a book which obviously most of you have not read and will never read, but fortunately there are some misguided people here in the country who are reading it. It's called What is Pakistanis? And I attempted to break up identity into elements. Just as, a national identity card is your NIC, but it just gives you the basics. That's not your full identity. It doesn't give you the color of your eyes in detail. It doesn't show the back of the head. It doesn't show your elbow. It doesn't show the shape of your legs. But each person has these constituents of identity. It's not just a mugshot or your thumbprint. So many elements of identity. So a nation too has many elements of identity. And I was able to identify 30 elements which I thought are positive elements. Individual elements, collective elements, evolving elements, and assertive elements. In the individual elements, a Muslim who lives in a country 97% Muslim, and yet we are so insecure about Islam, my God, and Khatm Nabuwat. We keep making sure it is inserted at every point just to make sure we remain Muslim. Even the great 18th Amendment, sadly, made it compulsory for the Prime Minister to be a Muslim. पहले तो सदर साहब थे, बड़ी अच्छी बात है जी, उनको मुसलमान होना चाहिए. But what is the danger, bhai? Out of 3% non-Muslims, is it likely that a Zoroastrian or a Hindu is ever going to be elected president or prime minister? Now prime minister also. Now next step will be the chairman of the Senate. If the president is out of the country, the chairman of the Senate becomes, so the chairman of the Senate should also be a Muslim. Make another amendment to the constitution. Then after the chairman, the speaker of the National Assembly. Suppose the chairman can't function, the speaker should also be a Muslim. My God, where will all this end? Yet the fact is that you are living in a country 97% Muslim, you feel good. You don't feel as insecure as an Indian Muslim, if that is the only comparison. There is something good about that aspect. Hearing the azan 5 times a day. But there is also the Hindu Pakistani. There is also the Christian Pakistani. There is also the Buddhist Pakistani. And I call them the original Pakistanis because, as Aizaz Hassan said, territoriality is the basis for national identity. This is their land. This was their land. We Muslims encroached on their land, took it over and decided to call it Pakistan. So the Hindu Pakistani is the original Pakistani. And he also identifies. Nice to do a commercial for a film I made called Ramchand Pakistani, directed by my daughter. But that was all about pointing out that Pakistan there are Hindus who are proud to be Pakistanis. For 35 years, I've been doing voluntary work in Tharparkar, where half the population is Hindu. And they celebrate the fact that they belong to this land. They want to remain Pakistani. Some of them have migrated. And some of them face persecution outside Tharparkar, but not in Tharparkar. They love being Pakistani. And then there's a poor character like me from a migrant family. I'm not a son of the soil, S-O-N. I might be impertinent enough to think I'm an S-U-N of the soil. But I doubt it, my wife doubts it too. But us migrants, we have fallen in love with this soil. To us, adopting the Pakistani psyche is a matter of survival, faith, existence. We didn't have the advantage of our Buzurgan being born in Lahore or in Chichavatni. But we feel as Pakistani as anyone else, and that too is part of the Pakistani identity. Then there is this collective elements of our identity. We are a remarkably democratic-minded people. Wow, wow, wow. For a country that has welcomed the Fauj 4 times, mashallah, all year round we are busy holding elections. Bar Association, Teachers Association, Doctors Association, Chambers of Commerce. You name it, everyone wants to have an election. What a fantastic phenomenon this is. Pakistanis are very democratic-minded people. And we collectively take pride, as I said, in the icons of 14th August, 23rd March, 6th September, 25th December, we remember the Qaid's birthday. We share this. But we also share compassion. We are one of the world's most compassionate people, proven time and again by surveys. The poor in Pakistan give more frequently than the rich. They may give far less, but they give more frequently. Wow, wow, wow. And we are so friendly. अबे 5 मिनट नहीं हुए किसी से मिल गया, हाय भाई मेरे घर आओ, खाना खाओ, चाय पियो. Oh, catch a Japanese saying that, with due respect to the Japanese. Catch a German saying it, with due respect to the Germans. they won't invite you to their homes until they really get to know you. What a hospitable, friendly, warm-hearted people we are. And we share this trait across the whole country. It's not just Punjabis or Sindhis or migrants. And we are innovative. My God, the way we get around any law you invent, we'll find a way to get around it. FBR can spend sleepless nights trying to catch the loopholes, tighten the loophole. Boy, I'll introduce you to people in Kharadar, Karachi, who will tell you how to beat FBR at its own game. Innovative, ingenuous. Then we have evolving identity. How are we evolving? Look at how we are evolving. 8-9% of the people use Urdu as a mother tongue, have Urdu as a mother tongue. 8 to 9%, according to the last census. 92% do not have Urdu as a mother tongue, and yet Urdu has evolved. It has become the national lingua franca, and you can speak it wherever you go. And we are a multilingual society. And we are changing Urdu. Mashallah, FM radio is at the forefront of mutilating both Urdu and English. And it's evolving. But another thing is evolving, which is ethnicity. Unlike the Chinese or the Persians or the Greeks or the Egyptians, we have no common Pakistani ethnicity. But we are taking steps towards it. We are intermarrying. A character, mad character like me, born in Madras, British-occupied South Asia, migrates here, finds that you people have not yet conquered Kashmir. So I go and marry a Kashmiri Punjaban, but discover that she conquers me instead of me conquering her. And Kashmir still remains elusive. Our children are the first Pakistani ethnic products. Baloch are marrying Pakhtuns in Quetta. I have visited some families, so beautiful to see Baloch and Pakhtun marrying. In Karachi, Saraikis are marrying Sindhis. And Pakhtuns to hai, Karachi is the world's largest Pakhtun city. So we are evolving. And we have assertive identity. Assertive kaise? On an individual level, if I was sitting on Oxford Street in London and 4 young men were walking towards me from a long distance, vaguely South Asian, I can immediately tell that badmash is a Pakistani. क्योंकि एक खास अंदाज है हमारे में, खर दिमागी है, एक खास तरीक़ेकार है सोचने का, हंसने का, इजहार करने का. I can tell this guy is not an Indian. He's a Pakistani. What is this? You can tell that immediately. When travel used to be regular to India, anyone who would walk into a shop, they would say, "Aap Pakistan se aaye hain." How did they know? Because we have developed a persona of identity. And of course, we are assertive because, like patriotic Pakistanis, we love our armed forces and they make sure we love them. But they deserve to be loved. They give their lives for us. And we have nuclear power. We are the only Muslim country in the world with nuclear weapons, the world's worst weapons. But it was India that forced us to acquire that capacity. So we have assertive identity there. Then we come to the bad news. We have 11 very negative elements to our identity. For example, we love conspiracy theories. ये तो यहूदियों का काम है जी, ये तो इंडिया का काम है, ये तो रॉ का काम है, और ये तो फौज का काम है, ये ISI का काम है. अपनी जिम्मेदारी नहीं लेंगे. Oh, no. We will not accept our own responsibility. It's always someone else who's responsible for our mess. Conspiracy theories galore. Even though we are moderate politically, we are very sane. We have allowed a minority religiosity, bigotry, and extremism to flourish. And it does not need a majority to turn the whole psyche of a country in the wrong direction. All it takes is a militantly well-organized minority. Look at what's happened in India. In the year 2019, the BJP got only 38% of the popular vote. 62% of Indian voters rejected the BJP, rejected RSS. But because of the absurdity of our electoral systems, first past the post, they got the majority of the seats. But what I'm saying is that only 38% vote getters have managed to change virtually 90% of the people's representation. I hope the remaining 62% show more cohesion in the next election. So, what else is troubled? The civil-military relations in Pakistan. We have not yet arrived at an equilibrium. In fact, the military's role advances, whether it is due to the weaknesses of the civil political side, or whether it is going to happen in any case when an institution becomes so well-resourced, so powerful, that it has to expand. Do institutions shrink on their own? Do they willingly give up space which has been ceded to them? It's an open question. I hope it does. My interactions with the armed forces show that they do not like, most of them do not like any kind of expanded role. Even the top leadership is not exactly comfortable having to provide support, policy support or whatever to the civil and political. Perhaps the civil and political need to assert themselves much more than they have. And of course, there's a price to pay for that. So, let me conclude with the last 3 points. One part of our identity will remain fixed with our DNA, like every human being. But the rest of our identity will always be responsive to change, to technology, to demography, to economics, to how much we earn. And we should be prepared for that and not see that as a sign of weakness. What happens when Pakistanis migrate legally or illegally? Look at the desperation with which people are willing to walk through Balochistan, get smuggled into Iran, get arrested in Bulgaria. My God, something is driving them. They don't want to be in Pakistan. But do they cease to love Pakistan? I mean, the kind of passion that overseas Pakistanis have for Pakistan, even after they acquire dual nationality, is phenomenal. I mean, sometimes there's more zeal and more patriotism in overseas Pakistanis than we find within Pakistan itself. There's so much love. So does migration, does dual nationality erode identity? I don't know the answer to that question, but it's happening. So, there is a paradox of nationalism and identity. And there is a need to prevent our sense of being a nation turning into ugly majoritarianism, chauvinism. हम ही हैं जी, हम मुसलमान हैं तो बस दुनिया में और कोई doesn't matter. Ultra-nationalism, of which there are signs in Hungary, there are signs in Italy, there are signs in France, there are signs in the United States. How do we do that? How do we promote humanism without becoming weak-kneed is also a question we need to answer. It's a continuing challenge. And finally, how do we actualize this further? In my humble opinion, it's already actualized. There's a lot of conflict and tension. And that tension, in my view, is a good, positive tension. There should be dynamic tension between TLP types and those who think TLP represents the dark end of bigotry. This is inevitable. There are tensions of national identity within the United States today. Black Americans, Southern Americans, who believe in the Confederate flag over 100 years after the Civil War. They're still raising the flag, and others are removing the statues. There's tension. So tension and conflict within a nation is not necessarily eroding. It's not necessarily destructive. It can produce catharsis, and it can produce a way forward, as long as it doesn't become violent. But the actualization, education. In a country where universities are proliferating like mushrooms, and we've got 20 million children out of school, what an obscenity. What an obscenity. And we're talking about increased foreign investment and improving the economy and so on. And we don't want to use the word family planning because we mistakenly think the people will think we are anti-Islam or whatever, a total nonsense. If Iran can enforce family planning the way it did, we need to learn from them and from Bangladesh. But education. Girls and women, the largest minority in Pakistan, 48.5% of the population, not 52%. Equity of opportunity. Oh, big, broad statement. How do you actualize it without transforming the consumerist, capitalist-driven system to conservation and respect for nature? Tall order. And very last two items. Reform of the democratic political system. We have a non-representative electoral system that, first of all, 50% don't vote, so it's not representative of 50%. Out of the 50% who vote, because of this absurdity of first past the post system, people who get 15% of the vote managed to represent not only the 50% who voted, but those who did not vote. We have to introduce compulsory voting, just as 23 other countries have compulsory voting. Greece, Belgium, even Egypt, Singapore, Australia, Argentina, Bolivia. And you have disincentives. If you don't vote, you pay a fine, or you get your ID card cancelled, or your passport gets cancelled, or you pay $50 or whatever. So, reform of the electoral system to make it truly representative of 98% of the voters, number one. Number two, if the winner does not get 50% plus one vote in the first round, there has to be a second round. So that the candidate who represents can say, I represent the majority. At the moment, virtually no one in parliament, with great respect, represents the majority in their respective constituencies. So, lastly, ijtihad in Islam. It is happening. The family law ordinance by Ayub Khan was an example of ijtihad. Sometimes the Council of Islamic Ideology does give some very progressive opinions. Sometimes it doesn't. Like the time when it said DNA evidence should not be held admissible for rape cases or some such opinion. Shocking. But ijtihad in a robust, vigorous, sustained way, challenging this so-called monopoly of the mullahs who become the custodians of Islam. We need to look them in the face, and I'm delighted that the government reversed its policy on TLP. And may they continue in that direction. But thank you all for your patience. National identity is alive and well. Thank you.